What happens when a daytime TV legend comes face to face with royalty gone rogue? You won't believe what unfolds when Ruth Langsford's legendary no-nonsense approach meets Meghan Markle's carefully crafted victim narrative on last night's explosive episode of Loose Women. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. This was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare that had viewers glued to their screens and reaching for their phones to capture every brutal second. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two of the most talked about women in British media go head-to-head in what can only be described as the most uncomfortable 12 minutes of television this year. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the Loose Women set last night. Dressed in her signature understated elegance, a cream blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, she carried herself with that familiar mixture of Hollywood confidence and royal composure that has become her trademark since stepping back from palace life. But seasoned viewers could sense something was different. Ruth Langsford, the show's unflappable anchor, greeted her with professional courtesy, but there was a coolness in her eyes that suggested this interview might not go according to Meghan's usual script. "Meghan, lovely to have you here," Ruth began, her tone measured and deliberately neutral. The studio audience applauded politely, but the energy felt forced, artificial. Meghan settled into her chair with practiced grace, offering that camera-ready smile that has graced magazine covers worldwide. But Ruth wasn't buying into the charm offensive. "Thank you for having me, Ruth. I'm always happy to support shows that give women a platform to speak their truth," Meghan replied, already setting the stage for what would become a recurring theme: subtle digs wrapped in seemingly innocent comments. Ruth's eyebrow twitched almost imperceptibly. As a veteran broadcaster who has navigated decades of celebrity interviews, she recognized the game being played. "Speaking of truth," Ruth said, leaning forward slightly, "there's been quite a lot of discussion about your recent statements regarding your time in Britain. Some viewers have found certain claims difficult to reconcile with documented facts." The temperature in the studio dropped several degrees. Meghan's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the arm of her chair. "I think it's important to remember that my truth is my truth, Ruth. Just because some people can't accept it doesn't make it any less valid." "Of course," Ruth nodded slowly, her journalist instincts clearly engaged. "But when you make public statements that contradict established timelines, such as claiming you were married 3 days before your televised wedding, don't you think that raises legitimate questions about accuracy?" Meghan's composure began to crack ever so slightly. "I find it fascinating how the British media continues to nitpick every word I say while giving others a complete pass. It's almost as if there's a different standard being applied here." The other panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't going according to the usual celebrity interview playbook. Ruth, however, seemed energized by the challenge. "I'm simply asking about factual accuracy, Meghan. Surely that's something we can all agree is important, regardless of who's making the claims." "What I find important," Meghan shot back, her voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there moments before, "is that we finally start having honest conversations about the systems that protect certain people while tearing others down. But I suppose that's not something everyone here would understand." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Ruth's eyes narrowed, and viewers at home could practically see the veteran presenter's patience evaporating in real time. This was no longer a polite chat between two accomplished women. This was rapidly becoming something much more dangerous. Ruth straightened in her chair, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the steel underneath. "I think I understand perfectly well, actually. I've been in this industry for over 30 years, and I've seen every kind of media manipulation their island. What I'm struggling to understand is why someone would choose to make claims that can be so easily fact-checked." Meghan's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Fact-checked by whom? The same establishment that spent years trying to silence me? The same system that protected those who were actually causing harm while painting me as the villain?" Her voice rose slightly, and for the first time since sitting down, her carefully constructed facade began to show real cracks. The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Ruth leaned back, studying her guest with the calculating gaze of a predator who had just scented weakness. "I'm not part of any establishment trying to silence you, Meghan. I'm simply a journalist, doing my job, which includes asking the questions that need to be asked." "Your job?" Meghan repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. "Right. And I suppose it's just coincidence that every question you've asked has been designed to undermine my credibility, rather than actually listen to my experiences?" But Ruth Langsford hadn't survived decades in British television by backing down from difficult conversations, and what happened next would leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about both women. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Ruth's voice, when it came, was deceptively calm but carried the weight of years of experience dealing with celebrity entitlement. "Meghan, I think you're confusing accountability with attack. When you make public statements that millions of people hear, surely you expect those statements to be examined." Meghan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Examined? Is that what you call this witch hunt? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels exactly like the kind of treatment that drove me out of this country in the first place." Her voice had taken on that particular tone that regular watchers of her interviews would recognize. The carefully modulated victim voice that somehow managed to sound both wounded and threatening at the same time. "Nobody drove you anywhere," Ruth replied, her patience finally beginning to fray at the edges. "You made choices, as we all do. But what's troubling is this pattern of rewriting history to suit whatever narrative you're trying to sell at any given moment." The other panelists looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. This had gone far beyond the usual loose women discussion into uncharted territory that none of them seemed prepared to navigate. Meghan, however, seemed to be warming up rather than cooling down. "Rewriting history?" Meghan's laugh was bitter, cutting through the studio atmosphere like a blade. "That's rich, coming from someone who works for the same media machine that spent years systematically destroying my reputation while I stayed silent and played by their rules." Ruth leaned forward, her broadcaster instincts fully engaged now. "Which rules were those exactly? Because, from what I can see, you've had plenty of platforms to share your side of things. $1 million interviews, Netflix deals, best-selling books, hardly what I'd call being silenced. You really don't get it, do you?" Meghan's composure was slipping more with each exchange, her carefully constructed public persona giving way to something raw, more authentic, and far less sympathetic. "This isn't about platforms or money. This is about basic human decency, something that seems to be in short supply in certain circles." The insult was clear, and Ruth's response was immediate and sharp. "Are you suggesting that I lack basic human decency for asking you to clarify your public statements? Because if that's where we've landed, then perhaps we need to have a very different conversation about who's being inappropriate here." Meghan shifted in her seat, and for the first time since the interview began, she looked genuinely rattled. "I'm suggesting that some people in this industry have made careers out of tearing down women who dare to speak their truth, especially women who don't fit their narrow definition of acceptability. And I'm suggesting," Ruth replied, her voice gaining steel, "that some people have made careers out of playing victim while never taking responsibility for their own actions. The question is, which one of us is right?" The studio fell into another loaded silence. Viewers at home were frantically typing on social media, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a full-scale confrontation between two fundamentally different philosophies about accountability, truth, and the price of fame. Meghan's next words would prove to be the point of no return. "You know what, Ruth? I came here thinking I might have an actual conversation with intelligent women about important issues. Instead, I find myself being interrogated by someone who's clearly more interested in scoring points than understanding the bigger picture." Ruth's eyebrows shot up. "Scoring points? I'm doing my job, which is asking the questions that viewers want answered. If you find that threatening, perhaps the problem isn't with the questions." "The problem," Meghan said, her voice rising despite her obvious efforts to maintain control, "is that people like you have created an environment where a woman can't share her experiences without being called a liar, where speaking up about mistreatment gets you labeled as difficult, where, Where making accusations without evidence gets you challenged? Ruth interrupted, her own voice rising to match Meghan's energy. Because that's what we're talking about here. Serious allegations that affect real people's lives and reputations. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned studio. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who clearly has no interest in actually listening. But Ruth wasn't finished, and what she said next would become the moment that defined not just this interview, but possibly both of their careers going forward. Ruth rose from her own chair, matching Meghan's dramatic gesture with one of her own. But her movement was controlled, deliberate, the action of someone who had finally decided that politeness had run its course. Actually, Meghan, since you're so concerned about listening, let me tell you what I've been listening to for the past several years. The studio was electric with tension now, camera operators instinctively adjusting their shots to capture what everyone sensed was about to be a defining television moment. Ruth's voice carried across the silent set with crystal clarity. I've been listening to a woman who claims she knew nothing about the royal family before marrying into it, despite having blogged about Princess Diana and Kate Middleton years earlier. I've been listening to someone who says she was denied help for mental health struggles by an institution that has publicly supported mental health initiatives for decades. I've been listening to accusations of racism that somehow never include actual names or specific incidents that can be verified. Meghan's face had gone white, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the shock at Ruth's direct assault on her narrative. How dare you? I'm not finished. Ruth cut her off, her voice gaining power with each word. I've been listening to claims about being married 3 days before your public wedding, which your own father-in-law's office had to correct. I've been listening to stories about your passport being taken away, when palace staff have confirmed you traveled internationally multiple times. I've been listening to a woman who says she was silenced, while simultaneously giving some of the most high-profile interviews in recent memory. The other panelists sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness this unprecedented demolition of a carefully constructed public image. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but Ruth wasn't done. And now I'm listening to you call me names and question my integrity, because I'm doing what journalists are supposed to do. Ask for evidence. When someone makes serious allegations that damage reputations and institutions. Meghan's composure finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're talking about. You weren't there, you didn't live through what I lived through, and you have no right to sit there and tear apart my experiences like they're some kind of fiction. Then, provide the evidence. Ruth shot back immediately. Give us specifics, instead of vague accusations. Tell us who said what, when, and where. Because right now, all we have are your words against everyone else's. And frankly, your credibility on factual matters isn't exactly spotless. The words hit Meghan like physical blows. Her perfect posture crumbled as the full weight of Ruth's systematic deconstruction of her public narrative sank in. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said, her voice shaking with rage. This is the treatment that makes it impossible for women like me to speak our truth. Women like you? Ruth repeated, her tone ice-cold. You mean wealthy, privileged women who use the language of social justice to avoid accountability for their own actions? Because I've interviewed plenty of women who faced real adversity, and they don't need to change their stories every time they tell them. That was the final straw. Meghan grabbed her designer handbag from beside her chair, her movements sharp and aggressive. I don't have to listen to this character assassination from someone who clearly has her own agenda. The only agenda I have, Ruth called out as Meghan started walking toward the exit, is getting to the truth. If that's a problem for you, then maybe the issue isn't with the questions. Meghan spun around one final time, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. You know what the real problem is, Ruth? People like you who think that just because you've been doing something for a long time, it gives you the right to bully and belittle anyone who threatens your comfortable little world. And people like you, Ruth replied without hesitation, think that playing victim gives you immunity from having to answer for the consequences of your words and actions. Well, not on my show. With that final exchange echoing through the studio, Meghan Markle stormed off the Loose Women set, her heels clicking against the floor in a staccato rhythm that seemed to punctuate the end of one of the most explosive interviews in the show's history. The heavy studio door slammed behind her with a resounding bang, that left the remaining panelists and audience in stunned silence. Ruth slowly returned to her seat, her professional composure returning as she faced the cameras. "Well," she said, straightening her blazer with hands that barely trembled, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about handling difficult questions with grace and maturity." The studio audience, finally released from the spell of the confrontation, erupted into applause. Ruth's colleagues looked at her with a mixture of admiration and shock, having witnessed their usually diplomatic co-host deliver one of the most devastating takedowns in daytime television history. As the cameras continued rolling and the show moved on to other topics, viewers at home were already flooding social media with clips, reactions, and commentary. Ruth Langsford had done what many had wanted to see for years. She had refused to let celebrity status and victimhood claims substitute for accountability and truth. The interview was over, but its impact was just beginning.